Well, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a ring out of a long strip of wood like this. This is a piece of sycamore that I'm going to make the top ring for this bowl out of. Now, as you can see, this bowl is not a bowl yet. It's just the segmented ring that's going to form the main body. And I'm doing a whole video on the making of that bowl. But I thought I'd make a separate video on making the top ring, because I think the method that I use to measure and cut this will be of interest. You see, this piece of wood has a nice split in it, and that runs down on the one side. You can see it showing up over here too. That won't be a problem because I'm only going to use a section of this. The way I'm going to measure it, though, we'll use this little triangular piece of hard board. This is art board, and it's cut at the same angle as these segments are. And how I use this will be showing up in this video as I move along to the next cut. Okay, now what I want to show is how I decide on the cut section size for a top ring. Now, clearly the top ring is going to overlap in this area out here, and I want to know how long to cut the segments and how thick I want them. What I've done is I've made this little device here. This is simply a large section, you could consider it. If you see, I've cut it the same angle as these sections that I'm going to work with. This is made so that it goes right to the point of intersection of the two sides, and it goes out a fairly large distance, probably larger than a bowl that I'll be making. You want to line this up to the center of your assembly, and a good way to do that is scale and put it on here. Now, this is a centering scale, so you see the 0 point is here, and it reads out 1, 2, 3, 4. So I just get this pretty close to the center so that I know the center of my bowl is in this area, and I will put this right at that point. Now you see I'm bisecting these two segments, and that helps me understand where the low point, if you will, of these sections will be, so I make sure I get a good overlap. The scale that I've drawn on here is a little unique. There's really two scales. The first one comes out, I start at 2 inches, and this is just a measurement from the point along this bisector axis. So it's 2, 3, 4, and on and on. That relates to the radius of the piece I'm going to end up with. These scales are perpendicular lines to the center axis, and I've marked those at inch points of total length. So 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches. They don't necessarily line up an inch apart because their measurement is from here to here. So in this case, that's a 3-inch line from here to here. That is my segment cut length. So let's do this, and let's decide that we're going to make a segment that I want to overlap into this area here, so that I know I have enough room to make my curve. And in that case, I know that I want a section that is going to be close to a little less than a 3-inch radius, or nearly a 6-inch circle. Now I know that I want to come out here with the outer diameter, and that's going to be roughly close to an 8-inch circle or 4-inch radius. What I want to do is cut my section. So in this case here, this line tells me I want that segment 4 inches long, and that length relates to using these segments from this point to this point. I also therefore know that if I'm going to cut that section 4 inches long, I want to know how wide that board has to be, and to come down to here, I know that I want to be at least 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches wide. So that means that if I run a 2-inch wide strip on a board and cut my sections 4 inches apart, 4 inches long from peak to peak, uh, if I have 8 of them, I'll be able to make a circle that'll accommodate the lip that I want to put on this bowl. So let's go to the saw and to the board, lay it out, and cut them. And I'll walk you through some of the other details of that. Well, before we go to the radial arm saw, I want to work this layout for you so that you can kind of see some of the aspects of it and some of the details that will give you a successful cut. I'm going to represent that board that we're going to cut into these segments right here. And as you recall, we want that 4 inches peak to peak on these segments. That's going to make that top ring. So this will be 4 inches here. When you start with a strip, and this strip in the cases I mentioned, I'm going to make it 1.5 inches or 2 inches. I'll probably go 2 inches just to be safe, so I know I'm going into the bowl deep enough to give me a good overlap. You're going to start with a board with a square edge, and you're going to make that first cut at 22.5 degrees. Then 4 inches down here, I'm going to make another cut. This is going to be the backstop of your table saw, radial arm saw. So let's illustrate that here. And the saw will come here. Remember, the blade is 1/8 of an inch thick. Next, you'll flip the board over such that this peak is over here, slide it up to the backstop, and you'll cut another piece. What that will do is, here's your 1/8 inch saw blade, and that piece will nest in here, like so. Actually, that means that the amount of wood that you've moved forward is going to be a little bit less than that 4 inches. As far as the piece of wood is concerned, you've done this to it and cut this angle. That means for 8 segments, that 4 inches, you will not actually need 4 times 8 or 32 inches. However, with that 1/8 inch saw kerf on each cut, that's 8 1/8 inch cuts, so that's 1 inch. So you would think you would add that to here, and that equals 33 inches. You won't actually use all 33 inches though, because these will be nested in there like that. For instance, from here to here is less than 8 inches. But I use this calculation method to give me 32 inches, and I'll stick with that. The reason being, for that last cut, you'll want a little bit of area to put your fingers and hold that piece on the saw when you run the blade, so that you don't get your fingers close enough to the blade to really cause a problem. So that means that I want a piece of wood about 32 inches long that we're going to cut out of the large piece of wood. And let's do that, and then we'll go and complete the rest of the steps. So here's a piece of sycamore I'm going to make that top ring from, and you can see that I have some splits in it, cracks, and that actually runs most of the length of this piece of wood. You can see it's pretty pronounced in here too. So I know I'm going to take the 2-inch strip from this area here. What I've done, since this wood is pretty consistent on that side, I'll show you what I've done on the other side. I've laid out all 8 pieces, and you can see how they nest in together. And as I mentioned before, that when you do that kind of cut, and you see I have accounted for the saw blade kerf, if I put my scale down here and go to the last piece, which is about there, I come out here and it's about 31 inches. Now, if you remember, 4 times 8 is 32, and that would be if these were end to end. So if this piece was flipped around such that this point ended up over here, then you would be 32 inches plus 8 times the 1/8 inch. Actually a little more because you're on an angle, but either way. So that would be over 32 inches. And here we're less than 32. That means if you want to lay it out this way just to be safe, and that's a good way to double check, now if I cut out in this area here, I know I have this much room to hold when I make my saw cut. Now I'm going to set up the radial arm saw, and you'll see how that is accomplished with the stop block. Well, this should look somewhat familiar to you. This is that marked board. I've cut it out of the large piece, as you can see, and I've also trimmed it down to the 2-inch width that I want. And all the markings are still there from what I measured out to give me a judgment on how long to cut this. You also see that I've got my radial arm saw set at the 22.5-degree angle. I did not set that using the scale that's on the tube of the radial arm saw though. I set it using an adjustable angle, a draftsman's angle. Obviously I've had this one for quite a while. And this is very accurate, so I can set this up for my 22.5 degrees and confirm that as being perfect. So when I cut these, it'll be as close as I can get it. The next step now is to take this, and I'll just reference the end that I started with. Since I want to cut first this piece off here, which will be the first cut to start my cut for the segments. So let me do that. I'll flip the board over and line this up, and I've got a saw cut mark on the table already from previous use, so I pretty well know where that blade's going to go. And I just want to leave a nice sharp point here. So now when I flip it over, you can see I've got the first cut. Now I got to make the next one. I know I want 4 inches of length, so now's when I get my scale out, and I will mark my 4 inches accurately on this piece of wood. And as it turns out, I think I was pretty good to begin with. Very good. So what I want to do next is set my backstop up. And the way I'll do that is I will simply put this in place, take this cut off piece of wood out of the way, and then I will line this up such that my saw blade will come right at that 4-inch mark. Put my stop board there and clamp it in place. Now I'm ready to make all my cuts, and we'll go ahead and do that now. Make sure you always push the saw back before you start cutting on a radial arm saw, because if that blade's engaged when you turn it on, it's not going to be a good day. I'll just keep cutting them, flipping the board over each time. That. Now I can put these together, and it should come out pretty close to a full circle. see I've cut one extra just in case I have a mistake. But now I'm ready to glue these up. I'll probably put a piece of contrasting veneer between each piece just to give that nice detail. And then I'll have the top ring for the bullet I'm building, and we'll go to that next.